Before I get into Rajeev into the talk, let me just say one thing. It's one of the most astonishing failures of politics in India that we are already 32% urban in India formally. Okay, the World Bank says that another 20% is urban-like places. Okay, that means these are just on the peripheries of urban areas. Essentially, they aspire to an urban life and urban conveniences, and they probably often commute to work fairly often. And so we are talking about an urban landscape that, in terms of mental approach at least, is more than 50% urban. Okay, so India is not a rural country anymore. At least people may be staying in towns or areas that are classified as villages or rural areas, and they're not yet, the definitions have not caught up with the idea of urban, but we have not gone into that. More important, the urban area is the future of India. This is where you're going to create jobs, this is where you're going to create efficiency, this is where you're going to build the future. So I'm surprised that there is not a single urban party in India. The one guy who was elected from an urban area, suddenly he goes off to Varanasi to fight the Prime Minister when his job is to sit in Delhi and govern that urban place. The one mayor of a city who has more powers than any another mayor in the thing wants to be something else. So it's a tragedy that we have an rapidly urbanizing country, and we do not have urban conversations in terms of the kind of leadership we have. Okay, Rajeev, so basically I just wanted to say, why is there this disconnect between the actual population that is living in urban areas, even assuming only 32% is urban, why is it that urban issues are getting so little space in our national discourse, and why is it that no party really espouses urban issues?
And so I don't have an answer for this, because I have asked this question myself, because it seems to me that the political landscape and the narratives and the conversations are, of course, importantly about poverty and rural deprivation and the need to improve the well-being and lives of people in rural India. But it has always been an inexplicable mystery to me why failure of urban governance, and this failure is not, like I said in my talk, is not a recent phenomenon. It has just expanded and become a much more dramatic failure in recent times. But why this failure of urban governance does not make it into mainstream political conversations is something that, I can spend a lot of time analyzing, but I think instead of that, we should just say, enough, we should bring it into the mainstream, and we should make this something that in elections 2018 in Karnataka or elections 2019 in India, that this issue will be discussed. And it is, just to keep making a point, Jaggi, if you notice, the only policy action on urban governance in the UPS tenure was one funny thing called JNURM. And with this NDA government, they replaced JNURM with some inputs from people like us and called it smart cities. But effectively, they are still skirting around edges of the problem. The problem of urban governance has been reduced to 800 crores will be put in these 3 projects as opposed to 400 crores in the last government. And that is not the problem. The problem, as you heard from the panel before and as you read today, is really about a failure of the third tier of democracy. The gentleman said that corporators today, and I have no hesitation in saying it, are the most corrupt lot in our democratic system, because we haven't done anything to change them, and we haven't done anything to disincentivize that kind of governance or that kind of political conduct. So I'm hoping that conversations like this will lead urban governance into becoming more central to our political discourse.
Right. Even with 32% urban population, we are talking about nearly 180 MPs who owe their seats to urban populations. Okay, regardless of whether you're living in a slum or in Indiranagar, the fact is that those are urban issues. Whether you're rich or poor. So the point is, there is a vote base there, and there is a mass feeling of anger that nothing is being done about cities and things like that. One question is really that this 74th Amendment didn't really get implemented. It is there. Like everything else, we legislate something and then leave it to its own devices. Now, the point is the court the only way of getting these things done? that is again a problem. We are asking now the court to basically super legislate a legislation like we do in every other case. Do you think the courts are the only answer? I think a lot of the earlier panelists, if you see, talked about trying to get the courts to get zoning laws implemented.
So, Jaggi, I just want to just make one more point that you just sort of alluded to in your conversation. While, for example, Bengaluru represents about 40 seats, which is about 1/5 of the assembly, why is urban power not more visible in assembly? And I'll explain that to you in very stark political terms. Political parties have managed to divide even the urban vote very beautifully. So there is this tendency to consider anybody who talks about governance as elite. I am given that a lot. Whenever I say something, they say, oh, he's elite. I mean, I don't know what that means, but I'm elite and somebody else is not elite. So the implication here is that a person who's poor and is an urban poor is not asking for the same things as the middle classes or the upper middle classes, which is actually wrong. Because governance and good roads and good public transportation and sewage and water and public health impacts the poor much more than the middle class. The middle class at least has the way of alternate ways of buying his way into public health, education and so on and so forth. So there is a very beautiful effort at having made or described calls of urban governance into something that is a bit more elitist and not really related to the poor and the urban poor. And that is part of the effort that I and many people are undertaking to say that this is really something that impacts the poorest the most. When he or she has to commute 6 hours in a bus to his or her accommodation place of living and having to find employment, it is not a terribly healthy way of living. So that's point number one. Point number two on this issue of, you made another point.
Yeah, about the fact that you have so many MPs and yet none of these get actually taken up. Huh?
No. So I think the fact, like I said, I think if in this group, if there is only 30% of the people here who show up for an election, if I'm an elected MP or an elected MLA, I would go to where I will get the other 60% vote. So the political balance today in favor of a call of reforms or urban power is really not being, let's say, demonstrated by the middle class and the taxpayers and the upper middle class as much as they should. And so therefore they are taken for granted in a way.
Could it be also that the fact that cities do not have an elected leadership which is empowered? I mean, if you see actually most cities actually come under the thumb of the chief minister who tends to hold the urban development department. Right. If you see in Maharashtra, it's the same thing. Fadnavis holds it. I'm sure it's the same here. Right. So why is it that the state government wants to hold the urban development department and the elected mayor actually is just a fellow cutting ribbons or kissing babies here? I mean, why aren't they not actually the guys running the city?
So, Jaggi, there are two questions that you raised, 2 points you make. One is the lucre and the lucrativeness of the urban development ministry. And I have no emphatic evidence, but I have empirical evidence to show that any minister who's been an urban development minister in this state, his fortunes have transformed dramatically post that. And I won't mention names, but you know it. And they all become the richest MLA and the second richest MLA and suddenly diversified their business activities, etc., etc. So anyway, so that explains what the great affection for the urban development ministry is. I always thought urban development ministry chief ministers kept because they had this great desire to do good for the cities, but that is far from the truth. The other issue of what is the point you were making?
No.
The second point is about accountability. And I think it suits a lot of people to make sure that accountability is diffused. Because currently today, let's say sewage floods people's homes. Who are you holding accountable? You have technically a Bangalore development minister, but it's very easily tossed between BWSSB, the BBMP. I went on an inspection visit to the areas where they were flooded, and so I called the assistant engineer of BBMP. He said, "No, sir, that's not my problem. BWSSB did it." I call the BWSSB guy, he said, "No, but I didn't do it. The BBMP guy was supposed to do the wall. He didn't do it." So this little this structure of having nobody really in charge, but everybody dipping his hand into the little piggy bank, suits that side of the equation very well. It doesn't suit the citizen and citizen groups at all. So I think this call for having accountability within a municipal government is an extremely important one. Whether it is the chief minister, whether it's an elected mayor, whether it is a minister who's designated and therefore controls all of these agencies and therefore is accountable to the citizen, we can debate on what the model should be. But the lack of accountability also means we are not holding people to account and responsible.
So, just to put it in another way, is it possible that it is the rural elites who have captured cities so that they can control the finances and the resources that city provides?
I wouldn't do this Oliver Stone conspiracy like that, Jaggi. I don't know if it's a conspiracy of the rural invasion of the urban.
I mean the rural rich or company people who get elected from rural areas, but they are the ones who are running the cities.
No, but I think everybody realizes today that the political power or the head of a political formation always be somebody who has a larger mass following, and that is invariably somebody with a rural background. So that is a given in Indian politics for the next at least 20, 30 years. That will not change. But having said that, the point is, if you allow somebody into your house and allow him to loot and allow him to do whatever he wants to do without any counter to it, he will do it. And so I think instead of looking for people to blame in the political system, I have started saying that this is really about us asserting our rights, us asserting the fact that this city is our city, our home, and therefore we have a responsibility and obligation to protect the city from whoever. I mean, it was Emperor Ashoka who said that, my religion will protect India, and then, of course, who came in and invaded us, and Genghis Khan decided he wants to. So I think if we take the same sort of spiritual approach towards protecting our city, saying that the good shall prevail and the evil shall be conquered, that doesn't work in real life.
A more sensitive question, could it be that a lot of the citizen apathy has to do with the fact that big modern cities, like whether it's a Mumbai or a Bangalore or a Delhi, are populated by migrants who often may not seem to have the same stake in the city. They come for a job, they remit their earnings to wherever their families are, and then if they get another job, they move on elsewhere. Of course, some of them may settle and become localized. But is this one of the reasons for the apathy of citizens, whereas where the people who have a stake in the city actually have a lower voice than before?
No, so I have come across this conversation many times, because, for example, when I deal with people in old localities like Malleshwaram, they tell me clearly, and even places like Indranagar, they say that, look, it seems like our voice as a traditional dweller of this community has been, in a sense, overshadowed by those who have come recently and who have a less of a stake in the local neighborhood. Now, this is a possible conversation to have. But I cannot imagine whether you are a 3-year resident of Bengaluru or a 10-year resident of Bengaluru or a 40-year resident of Bengaluru, or you're just passing through Bengaluru, that any one of these categories of people would say, okay, come exploit the city. Or we want sewage in our living room. Or we want garbage outside our door. I think everybody, whether he's a transient migrant, short-term resident of the city, or a veteran resident of the city, or somebody who was born and brought up here, all essentially want the same thing for the city. This kind of conflict will only come when it comes to culture, some lifestyle issues. When you have, in a community that is traditional, you suddenly have outside influences. I have complaints like this all the time, where there's a 25-year-old student who cranks up the music, and therefore the traditional neighbors don't like it. Those are different from this. I think every resident in the city reasonably expects a decent standard of living, decent public services, and decent infrastructure. And that won't change depending on how long you've lived here.
Yeah, politically, I mean, we in India has seen several kinds of moves for, say, separating into smaller regions so that better governable. Recently, we saw Telangana being created out of unified Andhra Pradesh. Right. Okay. Similarly, there are other smaller movements in other states. UP could conceivably 4 different states. Right. I mean, Bihar was split into this thing. But why is it that we never had a movement which says that, look, I want this city to be substantially self-governing, even if it is within the broader state. Like I think at the time of the creation of Maharashtra, there was a proposal that Mumbai state would be separate from Maharashtra, but of course, the local people opposed it, and so it didn't stay that way. But is there a way where, say, a Bangalore or a Mumbai can actually become semi-governing city-states, and while remaining within the overall fabric of the state?
No, so the theory of this is sound, because when you have a city of 12 million,
right,
technically you should be a union territory, you should have your own form of government, or you should have your own government institutions and so on and so forth. But let's be practical. We are living in the real world. Just like KCR will never let Hyderabad go, no political leader of Karnataka will allow Bengaluru, which is 40% of the SGDP of the state, to ever go. I mean,
I'm not asking them to separate it. I'm saying, can it have a different governance structure?
But we already have. That is what the 74th Amendment is. I think the 74th Amendment's ULB, BBMP is supposed to be that separate government. It is because it is so terribly dysfunctional that we keep having to go back to the state government for handouts. What is the problem of the BBMP? BBMP has a budget of 9,000 crores. It has huge amount of tax leakage and therefore is not able to grow its revenues properly. It does not monetize all of its land properly in a transparent manner, so it does not raise capital. So you end up having an independent body, democratic body, the third tier of a democracy, but that is financially completely incapable of self-governing.
Right.
So it is like being a separate country in the continent of Africa, but a dictator is looting all the money and you keep needing to go to the US or the UN for handouts. So that is what technically we have all the pieces. We have an urban local body. We elect people into the local body. They have a budget to administer, but that is the level that is dysfunctional. That is what we have to fix for us to really preserve the fact that we have true self-governance.
Right. You talked a little earlier about how people say some of the issues you espouse sound elitist. But the point is, many of the solutions that vested interests have proposed are also elitist. It doesn't make sense, because why is a Bangalore not doing, say, mass urban transport? Only now we are doing some metros and all that. But even, say, things like buses and things like that. Why is it that cities are privileging cars over buses? I mean, you wouldn't have such a problem in Bangalore if cars were taxed more, or you charged a congestion charge every time you use the outer ring road, Sarjapur Road. I mean, but you are not having those kind of policies. You are having a one-time fee for cars, and after that, for the next 10 years, you can keep polluting and using the car indefinitely, but you are doing that. So why is it that even people who get their vote from the slums do not promote mass transport?
No, and that's what I said. I think there is no planning. I said that at the beginning, at the top of the day. I said there is no planning. The MPC that is supposed to understand and represent every one of these needs of different population groups, different income demographics into the overall plan does not exist, does not meet. So what we have is a group of businessmen or friends of the chief minister or friends of the local politician who form a group, and they decide to vision the city with what inputs, what quantitative facts, what qualitative inputs. So you have a process that is broken, and that is the entire premise of this conversation, that the process is broken, the institutions that are supposed to be functioning are not functioning, and the planning that needs to be done in a manner that represents everybody and every need and is sustainable in growing this city forward, making sure that the growth is orderly and sustainable, is not being done. And that is why the conversation should be increasingly around how do we do it. How do we make sure that the growth is orderly? How do we make sure the growth is sustainable? That every time we talk about development and growth, we don't mean 20 other lakes should be sacrificed. Every time we talk about development, we don't talk about 400 trees being axed. There is no contradiction in sustainability and development. Right. There is no contradiction in orderly growth and growth. And that is what needs to come together and be part of this urban governance narrative that we need to build.
Right. One thing, what we have seen is, given the fact that all our metros and mini metros are broken, we have seen some kind of leadership emerge, like we saw in the previous panel, people who are concerned about their localities and other things. But we still find that most of them are actually apolitical, say, social activists. So they are not really taking it up at a political level where things can change, because only when the politics changes, you are actually going to get structures that will work, right? Yeah. Because I don't think it's a technical solution which a social activist can get up to a point. Maybe they can get a drain removed or an unlawful building demolished. Correct. But that's it. But you're not going to get the structural change. So why are we not seeing the emergence of truly urban political parties?
No, I think I believe, I come from the school of thought that truly active citizens will throw up urban leaders. I would argue that the reason there is no urban leader today or urban political momentum today is that citizens haven't really come around and coalesced around these 4 or 5 issues that are dear to them and that they say loudly are important to them. I feel that in the last 1.5 years, and the steel flyover Beda movement was a critical turning point, I believe that history will tell us in future, is that citizens are now rallying. On 2nd of October, when I just did 4 days of tweeting about Swachh Bengaluru, 17,000 Bengaloreans came out. Nothing to do with politics. They came out to clean their lakes, they came out to clean their neighborhoods, and they did it because they felt that they're wanting to do something for the city. I think the tide has turned. I think, I say this as somebody who's been involved in this for almost 10 years. I see more people today talking to me at the airports when I catch a flight about my efforts in Bengaluru and their desire to see Bengaluru change than Digital India or Aadhaar or net neutrality, which used to be the case 4 years ago. But it is turning. I have no doubt that in 2018 Karnataka election, this will evidence itself that people of Bengaluru will speak to the need for a new approach, new governance approach, new political approach towards addressing this challenge of reclaiming Bengaluru.
Right.